Man stares at roasted corn in his hand and sees a business opportunity because his son was screaming from the corn, but he still ate it with gusto, and everyone around him liked to put chili peppers on their food. He was inspired. Traditional Mexican food has always been a big market in the United States, but it's never been taken seriously. The man did some research and found that the only flavors on the supermarket shelves were plain Cheetos and Cheetos with cheese, which only white people like to eat, and Mexicans like him can't eat them at all. If he could introduce a spicy Cheetos, it would sell like hotcakes. So he and his wife started working out how to make a hot sauce. Because of the lack of experience, their son always cried when he tried it. However, while they were working tirelessly to make their handmade hot sauce, the market has seen the emergence of blended chili additives. Just one bite will increase your appetite, but the man insisted on using natural ingredients. He is convinced that this will be favored by the market. In order to mix the chili powder well, he turned the hamster cage into a tumbling machine. After countless adjustments and improvements, a hot and spicy sauce was finally born. My son couldn't stop eating it. The fate of the family changed forever. Do ordinary people really have a chance to turn their lives around? This true story will give you a different answer. Richard had a miserable childhood because he was a Mexican American. He went to school and suffered from all kinds of bullying. His white classmates looked down on him for eating tacos. They knocked the burrito out of his hand, and when his mother found out about it, she made him an extra burrito and encouraged him to share it with his classmates. That day at dinner, the school bully came back. Richard held up his burrito for him to taste. The bully was disgusted and pushed his little brother to try it. He took a bite of the burrito with a bitter look on his face. He was instantly overwhelmed by the delicious taste of the burrito. The school bully was craving for more. As he reached for the burrito, Richard held him down and told him he had to pay for the burrito. He bought the burrito for 25 cents. Richard's brains not only helped him out of the crisis, but also won him the heart of a female classmate, and word of the taco's deliciousness spread all over campus. Richard earned a lot of pocket money in order to give his beloved classmate Julie a surprise. This day he was going to buy a chocolate for her. When he was checking out, he accidentally took out a handful of money. The police behind him thought that Richard's money was stolen. If he was a white kid, he could have explained himself. Unfortunately, his skin color didn't give him a chance to explain. If the world treats you like a criminal, you'd probably be a criminal too. So Richard dropped out of school before he finished elementary school. As he grew up, he became more and more of a criminal. He made his classmate his wife. The two of them made a good living in the Mexican immigrant area. Of course, they were always on the run from the police. After a couple of years, they were just going through the motions. The twist of fate began when his wife became pregnant. Julie told Richard in a long, deep voice she didn't want her child to live a life of uncertainty. In order to give them a better future, they had to change things. But it's not easy for a prodigal son to come back. When his former brother invited him to rob again, he was tempted. But then he looked at his sleeping, pregnant wife. Richard finally decided to walk into the house. But good choices don't mean good changes. When the second child was born, the family was struggling to make ends meet. Their youngest son had to have his formula made with tap water. The oldest son had to use chewing gum for his shoes. In order to make ends meet, she sold tortillas on the street. She always encouraged Richard not to give up. No matter how hard life got, Richard tried to find a job, but with a criminal record and a low education, he couldn't even get a job interview as a porter. One day my son accidentally touched a car. He was verbally abused by the white owner. Richard had had enough of this discrimination. He was furious, but his wife stopped him in time. If the police had been alerted, it would have been bad for him. Sometimes you have to lose face to make a living. Richard ran around every day. He eventually found a job as a temporary laborer. When he was out of work, his two children couldn't even get a full meal. At the end of his rope, he had the idea of going back to his old job, so he approached a former gangster. He told him to be responsible for his family. Besides, he had already quit. Now he works in a regular factory. Richard asked him for an introduction. The boss was upset about his sudden departure, but seeing his determination to change, he finally agreed to make an introduction. Soon after, Richard received a reply. A cleaner was needed at the Philidor factory, but when he filled out the application, he was stumped. To be a janitor, he needed a high school diploma or higher. He had no choice but to ask to take the form back with him. When his wife found out, she made up a high school diploma for him, but the interview went awry. Nervous, Richard spoke to the manager. He revealed the fact that he had never been to high school. He was told that he graduated from elementary school and had been in jail. The manager told him to get lost, in order not to disappoint his wife, for the sake of his children to have enough to eat. Richard once again swallowed his dignity. He begged the manager to give him a chance. He promised to be the best cleaner he could be. Eventually, the manager was impressed by his sincerity. At that moment, the manager could never have imagined. His act of kindness would change the fate of the entire factory. Richard cherished his hard-earned job. He went in earlier than others and stayed later than others. He was always enthusiastic about his work. As time went on, he became interested in the factory's production machinery. Richard curiously asked engineer Myron about the process of making Cheetos, but his face changed in an instant. The boss saw something was wrong and rushed over to say hello. "You know, this is someone else's survival skill. The lower class is not authorized to ask about it." During the meal, the boss explained to Richard the rules of the factory. There is a strict hierarchy in the factory. It can be seen from the dining area in the cafeteria. Those sitting at the front are the executives. They are the most well-paid, followed by the floor managers. They're paid well, but they have to take all the responsibility. Next are the engineers. They're arrogant because of their skills. The managers have to look up to them, and the best of them all was Myron. But because of the color of his skin, he worked hard for 15 years and still couldn't become a manager. And then there were the bottom feeders like Richard. They don't get a guaranteed paycheck, and they don't get a day off. As a low-level employee, he couldn't communicate with his peers. Richard didn't want to be a janitor for the rest of his life. He wanted to work his way up to the top. So the next day he broke the rules. He went to talk to Myron, the engineer. At lunch, he offered him a burrito. He offered to give him a burrito at lunch and sincerely wanted to be his mentor. In all his years of service, Myron had never seen such generosity. So he sat Richard down. The boss from afar gave him a look of approval. Unfortunately, Myron didn't accept him as his pupil. One day, Richard was cleaning like he always did. Suddenly, he realized that there was something wrong with the machine. So he told Myron that the air pressure in the oven was off. He thought he was joking, but when he got closer, he saw that there was something wrong with the machine. It was at this point that Myron accepted Richard as his apprentice. Richard was curious about what he liked, and Myron was patient enough to teach him. When he saw the fried chips, he asked Myron if the oil was too hot, but Myron was used to it because burnt chips are thrown away. Richard couldn't understand why people wanted to throw away brown things. In order not to lose track of his work for the rest of his life, Richard worked early and stayed late, learning all sorts of mechanical things from Myron. It didn't take long for him to learn how to operate and maintain all kinds of equipment. He was able to fill in for his master when he was on vacation. With his hard work and dedication, he was also recognized as an outstanding employee. Everything seemed to be going well, but fate played a joke on him. From 1984 to 1992, the country was in an economic crisis. The president immediately canceled many welfare benefits for the poor. Due to the market downturn, the price wars between food factories intensified, and orders from the factories dropped dramatically, and workers' shifts were cut back, which meant less money for everyone. Many had to go back to their old jobs, and Richard's application for a promotion to maintenance man is not on the cards. For 8 years, he was still working as a janitor. That's when Philidor's president, Roger, made a video to inspire the factory staff. The whole world is going through an economic crisis. Every factory is struggling to survive. But with every challenge comes an opportunity. I hope you can think like me. Most of the workers ignored the president's words. Only Richard had a sparkle in his eye. It was as if he had recorded these words for himself alone. Opportunity always favors those who are brave enough to discover and innovate. That day when he was picking up his son from school, he bought 3 pieces of roasted corn with chili peppers on the side of the road, even though they were spicy. His son ate them with gusto. Richard had the idea of making spicy Cheetos. He traded all of his remaining paychecks for the ingredients for the experiment. His wife was worried about this month's living expenses and rent. After half a lifetime of poverty, was there really a chance to turn it around? She couldn't bear to discourage her husband and decided to go crazy with him one more time. After one failure after another, they finally came up with a hot sauce that people couldn't stop eating. Richard couldn't wait to find the manager and proposed a more spicy version of the sauce, but the factory was on the verge of closing down. It takes a lot of money to develop a new product and a very long lead time. It was clear that the manager was not going to take his advice. He even taunted him, saying that you're too whimsical for a janitor. On his way back, he sought his friend who was laid off working in his old job. His heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. He wouldn't have done it if he didn't have to. His best friend's mother was suffering from a disease. She had no money for treatment and had to watch her loved ones die. In order to have an income for himself and everyone else, Richard sneaked into the manager's office. He went straight to the company's internal address book. After a lot of thought, he dialed the president's office. The secretary thought it was the manager, but the person on the other end was a janitor. Richard pleaded with him not to hang up. He had a business plan that would save the factory. Perhaps out of empathy for the janitor, the secretary eventually transferred the call to the president. The president was confused by Richard's inability to speak. It wasn't until this statement that the president became sufficiently interested. The president did not deny Richard's idea because of his status as a cleaner. Instead, he asked him to send some samples. With great trepidation, Richard went to the post office with his wife and carefully packaged up the hot Cheetos. Soon the samples arrived at the president's office. He couldn't wait to open the package. He took a small taste of the chili Cheetos. The next moment, he was so hot, he wanted to drink water. But strangely enough, the spicier the flavor. The more he ate, the more he wanted to eat. Soon Richard got a call from the president. The president said his idea was very creative. He decided to meet in 2 weeks to discuss the details. The factory executives were shocked when they heard the news. They started looking for Richard from top to bottom. The manager was furious when he got the call and publicly berated Richard for his work. Once the president realizes that the plant is losing money, he might pull the plug and shut down the factory. Everyone would lose their jobs. It was clear that Richard couldn't afford to do that. He began to question his decision. When he got home, his wife realized he was in a bad mood, so she put Richard in front of the mirror and encouraged him not to give up so easily. These people are afraid they'll be saved by a poor boy. Even if you fail, I'll be with you to the end. These words certainly gave Richard a boost. For his next meeting with the president, his wife had bought him an expensive tie. It was the first time in his life that Richard had ever been so formal. His wife told him he was now the most handsome man in the world. The president's parent, Lincoln, arrived on schedule. The time had come to decide Richard's fate. For this day, he put on his best suit. While he was gushing about spicy Cheetos, he was interrupted by a marketer. He asked him what his market share would be. Richard froze in his tracks. He didn't understand the vocabulary. He hadn't finished elementary school. He suddenly thought of the long aisles in the supermarket. He opened his arms and said, "That's how big the market is." The executives were instantly amused. They laughed at Richard's ignorance. Then he said he didn't know what market share was, without realizing it. The president was impressed by his enthusiasm. When Richard finished his speech, the president got up on the spot and opened his arms to question the executives around him. "Did you know that we would get so much market share?" He thanked Richard for giving him a lot to think about. Before leaving, the president said to his manager, "No matter what you think, I'm going to invest in this product." Soon, spicy Cheetos were added to the production line. The first batch of the product was successfully put on the shelves of major supermarkets. But strangely enough, all the other products on the shelves were empty, but no one was buying spicy Cheetos. This huge contrast was not what Richard had expected. The manager also had a reason to stop production. He didn't want to put anyone else out of work because of him. He suspected he'd never get out of the business. But his mentor, Myron, didn't think that was the right thing to do. He encouraged him to take a moment to think. No one can just make it, and no one stays the course. Maybe if he overcame this obstacle, there would be a ray of hope. But Richard racked his brain and couldn't figure out why he couldn't sell. Just then the power went out in the house. When he lit a candle, his eldest son's words woke him up. "Customers don't even know what's in your bag. Naturally, they won't buy." But how could he afford to advertise at this time? At that moment, the eldest son took out his own piggy bank. This is the money he saved from collecting garbage. For the sake of his father's dream, he didn't spare any money. His son's gesture rekindled the dream in Richard's heart. Since the company didn't want to pay for advertising, Richard had to enlist the help of his former gangsters. Though these men looked fierce, but they were all experts in sales. Then he gathered them all together at the factory. The manager tried to stop him, but his buddies stopped him right there. Some of them made snide remarks about him, and Myron shut him up. By now, Richard wasn't alone. He carries the weight of countless families and the hopes of the underclass. It was clear to everyone that Cheetos weren't selling because they didn't taste good. As long as the publicity is increased, there will be a response. Richard's impassioned plea for everyone to join the Chili Cheetos sales team. They're handing them out on the streets for free to arouse the curiosity of the customers. Richard even bought out the supermarket's supply of Chili Cheetos. When asked what he was buying, he took the opportunity to introduce the snack. And soon there was a herd effect. The unloved Chili Cheetos became a local sensation. Richard did the same thing he did when he was in school, selling burritos. In the days that followed, the supply of Chili Cheetos almost exceeded the demand. When the president got the sales figures, he was shocked. He asked his manager how much he spent on advertising. He replied that he hadn't spent a dime. The president called Richard and said he was going to increase production, and this time, the goal was 5 million cases. The factory, which was about to close, was revitalized. All the production lines were synchronized. Employees who were laid off were called back to work overtime. At this moment, Chili Cheetos is not just a simple snack. Behind it is the hope of countless families. Everyone is very enthusiastic about this hard-earned job. In order to speed up the orders, the machines were put under pressure that they shouldn't have been. 6 months later, the factory was profitable. Everyone had a stable income. It's true that great companies rise from adversity. Myron was promoted to manager. Richard was delighted with his master's promotion, but when he found out that he was still a janitor, once again, he was devastated. His dream of being a maintenance man had never come true. But then the manager ordered him to clean the toilets upstairs. Although he was very frustrated, he had to obey. When Richard arrived upstairs with his mop, he found Roger, the CEO. Waiting, he told Richard that he had come from a humble background as a child, and that it was his seemingly unattainable dreams that led him out of that small place. He believes that dreamers can't be tied down, and smart people don't want to be tied down to other people's dreams. The president made him an official offer to join the company's top team. The president turned around and inserted a gold name tag into the doorframe. Richard was transformed from a lowly janitor to a marketing director. There were so many grievances and sorrows along the way, but looking back, it was all worth it. At this moment, there was a long-awaited applause downstairs. This applause is not only a recognition of Richard's struggle, it's also an incentive for all those who struggle at the bottom of the ladder. Looking at the luxurious office in front of him, Richard felt like a dream. After briefly calming down, Richard told his wife the good news. This is the end of the movie. Richard has written an inspiring story from his own experience. In the arena of life, everyone can be the helmsman of his own destiny. In the river of destiny, every man can be the author of his own story. Even if it starts in a dark valley, the end can be a starry sea. In a world full of challenges and opportunities, courage and perseverance are the strongest shields. You may get lost on the road ahead. You may fall in the storm. Maybe it's the first step you take to see the light of hope. May you follow your dreams, grit your teeth, and keep going in the moments of fatigue. May your dreams never die in your heart. As long as you keep fighting, you'll reach glory. May you go forward on the road of pursuing your dreams and finally achieve a brilliant life.